İyi akşamlar sayın seyirciler. Bugün farklı bir konuğumuz var. Konuğumuz Amerika'dan Profesör Helen Ebaugh, Houston Üniversitesi'nde sosyoloji profesörü ve profesör çok önemli bir kitap yazdı. Gülen Hareketi, inanç tabanlı bir sivil toplumsal hareketin sosyolojik analizi diye. Bu kitap bilindiği gibi Doğan Kitap tarafından Türkçe'de yayınlandı. Bugün biz bu programda bu kitabın yazarıyla bir söyleşi yapacağız. Tabii ki söyleşimiz İngilizce olacak. Welcome to our program. So let me start from this. Okay, this is interesting actually for an American academician. You wrote a book on a movement which is rooted in Islam and in Turkey. Okay, so what was the motive behind that leads you to write this book?
Well, I teach the sociology of comparative religions at the University of Houston. And in fact, I was in the classroom teaching when the plane hit the World Trade Building on 9/11.
Okay.
And for those days after 9/11, many people were introduced to Islam, people who had hardly heard of the religion before, and everything was Islam and terrorism, Islam and violence, Islam and an attack on America.
Okay.
And I was very concerned to hear what we call the moderate or the nonviolent, the peaceful Muslim voice protesting those actions. And on September 21st, I saw a one-page statement in the Washington Post protesting the 9/11 events and talking about Islam as a peaceful movement, peaceful religion, signed by Fethullah Gulen, imam and scholar. And it caught my attention. And then a few years later, I began getting graduate students from Turkey, some of whom were involved in this movement.
Okay.
And several of them wanted to write theses on the movement. So I became acquainted with the movement. And then I made my first interfaith dialogue trip to Turkey in 2006. And I visited many of the schools and Sema Hospital and Samanyolu TV and Zaman newspaper. And I became very fascinated with the movement.
Okay. According to you, what makes this phenomenon as a social movement? Is it a social movement?
I think it's a social movement because it involves large numbers of people gathered together around very central issues and trying to achieve change in society.
Okay.
So it's a social movement in my estimation, and I call it a civil social movement.
Okay.
Because not only is it religious, but it's also trying to do good things in the society and improve societies.
Okay. How could you draw the line between religious and the civic? For you, it is a civic movement, yes?
I call it a civic movement rooted in Islam. It's definitely religious in its roots.
Okay.
But it's not just a religious movement to promote Islam or to proselytize, to gain converts.
Okay.
At the heart of this movement is wanting to educate young people, wanting to do good works in the society, and make society and humankind a better place to live.
Okay.
So in that sense, I think it's a civic movement.
Okay.
Unlike many religious movements whose sole purpose is to promote the faith and to proselytize the faith.
Okay. For you, this is something original, isn't it? It's rooted in a religious background, if you like, but it is a mainly civic movement.
Well, it's not the only one of its kind in the world.
Okay.
There are other similar movements historically.
Okay.
I think one of the things that makes the Gulen movement very unique is its non-hierarchical, non-bureaucratic structure.
Okay.
I think that's a very important characteristic of the movement.
Okay.
It's very difficult to know how many members there are, or to count the number of schools, because there are no central statistics. There's no president of the movement.
This is something positive, isn't it, according to your opinion?
I think it makes the movement very powerful. In this sense, the operating agenda of the movement is to move into a local area, perhaps a businessman or a student, and then to see what the needs of that local area might be, and then to organize the local people to define those needs and to do something about it. So the local people feel like this is their project. Tremendous commitment to these projects because they belong to the local people. So I think that's one of the things that generates such commitment to the movement and to the projects of the movement.
The one important concept is the commitment. Yes, you underline in your book again. So how can you interpret this? Why people in the movement so committed to do the project, to achieve something?
I think part of it is rooted in Turkish history. This notion of hospitality and taking care of one's neighbor and doing good for the society. Turkish people are so hospitable. That impresses a lot of us who come to Turkey. And when Mr. Gulen began preaching in the late 60s and 70s, at first I thought he's introducing totally new ideas. But he wasn't. He was drawing upon a very rich Ottoman past and upon ideas that the Turkish people were very familiar with. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the commitment is definitely rooted in Islam. People are giving to the movement, not only money, but time and energy, because they see this as their religious duty. They talk about things like, sadaqah and this whole system of vakifs and setting up good works in the society. So those kind of concepts are very, very important to the commitment dynamic, but also the sense of fellowship and the sense of joining with other people to do good. In my estimation, the pulse of the movement, at the heart of the movement, at least structurally, is this notion of the sohbet. People gathering together once or twice a week with fellow members, discussing ideas of Mr. Gulen, discussing interpretations of the Quran, getting to know one another, learning one another's needs, and then learning what kind of projects need volunteers and funding. And throughout all of my interviewing, this notion of the sohbet was so powerful.
Have you been to one of the sohbet?
Yes, I have, to one or two. And they're amazing. This sense of brotherhood is amazing. I interviewed a group of businessmen in Bursa that had just returned from Darfur. And they promised to rebuild a village in Darfur within 2 years. And I think they're going to do it. But one of the gentlemen said to me, I now have brothers in Darfur and all over the world. And he said, it's so wonderful to be able to go to a sohbet and share with people basic ideas.
But as far as I see something new in this movement. For instance, Islam, Islamic history, Turkish culture, Ottoman history, and Islamic tenets and doctrines, and the traditions as an intellectual tradition was there. I mean, so something happened and it became available for a civic movement. I think the role of the Fethullah Gülen Hoca Efendi to make this available for the modern world, is it?
I think one of the unique things that happened when Mr. Gulen began preaching is his notion that we must educate the young people. This was a time in Turkish history when there was a lot of fear of communism and leftist movements, and he was very concerned about the youth. But what was unique is he kept saying we need to educate the youth, but not only in religion, but also in science and technology. And his point was that one can enter the modern world and be educated in the modern world and still be a good Muslim.
Okay.
And I think that's what caught the attention of a lot of people at that time in Turkish history.
Okay. Let me return your book. Do you have some one-stroke thesis in your book? What is your main thesis in the book?
Well, I have two. I would say I have two basic research questions that I started with.
Okay.
When I came to Turkey and saw all these wonderful schools and the hospitals and the newspaper and all that was going on in this movement, everything's so first class. It's done so well.
Okay.
And I realized it takes money to do that.
All right.
And one of my first questions was, where's the money coming from? And of course, this was also the time when a lot of the critics of the movement and even people that were becoming familiar with the movement were saying, surely there's some government support. Is it Saudi Arabia? Is it Iran? Is it the American CIA? Where's the money behind all this?
Okay.
So that was a first question. And then a second question was this commitment. What is generating this kind of enthusiasm and commitment on the part of millions of people? So those were the two basic questions that I began with.
Okay. So
I actually wanted to write a book just on the finances.
okay.
And when I approached publishers, Oxford University Press, Cambridge, University of Chicago, Rutgers, all the editors said the same thing to me. Dr. Ebaugh, how do you spell that? Gulen. What is that? Who is it? They had never heard of Mr. Gulen.
Okay.
So they all said, we need a book that's more general. We need an introduction of this movement to the Western world. So I had to reformulate the book
All right.
and present that more general idea of the movement. And it was written primarily for an American and Western audience.
Yes, I understand that.
Very much so.
Very much so. So, are you going to carry on to follow this book with another one?
Probably. What I'm interested in now is tracing the movement as it leaves Turkey and begins to become globalized.
Okay.
I've been to Azerbaijan, I've been to Melbourne, Australia, to Brussels, to Paris. I'm hoping to go to Spain this summer. I want to see what happens to the movement as it globalizes.
Okay.
How does it stay the same? How does it change? How is it going to adapt? Because it's growing rapidly.
Okay.
We estimate now there are about 120 countries that have schools on 5 continents. It's growing very quickly. This is a powerful movement, and I see it becoming even more powerful in the days to come.
It is going to be very interesting, this book, to see the change from continent to continent, probably from country to country. Anyway, let me come to the role of the Hoca Efendi Fethullah Gülen in the movement. I mean, what sort of role he played? He originated and just left it, or is he a charismatic leader of the movement?
He's a charismatic leader in the sense that he inspired the movement in its very beginnings. It was his ideas, his commitment, his enthusiasm, his religious spirit that generated the movement. But unlike a lot of charismatic leaders, what's very interesting about Mr. Gülen is the fact that he doesn't want a lot of recognition for all of this. I thought I would get in trouble with him for calling it the Gulen movement. As you know, he doesn't like that.
Yes.
He wants it called the Hizmet movement. Or it's very interesting. Even the Gulen schools, he does not like that term, apparently.
Yes.
And I talk about the Gulen-inspired schools. But unlike a lot of charismatic leaders, he's always trying to deflect attention away from himself.
Okay.
I've been asked often in the last few days, what will happen when Mr. Gülen dies?
Okay.
And my response to that is, I really don't think it's going to have a big effect in the movement. And the reason...
Why?
Because I think the movement is far beyond Mr. Gülen at this point. And probably the way he would want it. There's so many people now that have internalized and incorporated his spirit and his ideas.
Okay.
And this is going to live on. People will miss him, but we have his works, we have his appearances and whatever.
Okay.
But more importantly, he lives in the hearts and the minds of millions of people.
Okay.
And that's going to go on whether he's in Pennsylvania or he's not.
Yes. Well, this movement is for you is related with the global peace. Yes, one of the important function or role of this movement is going to be contribution to the global peace. Yes,
Definitely.
So can you elaborate this a bit?
Well,
How it is going to be?
Well, I think especially the recent focus of the movement on interfaith and intercultural dialogue is extremely important.
I see.
In this global world where we have neighbors of so many different cultures and faiths, we have to understand one another. And I mentioned, I don't think I have this in the book, but one of my favorite quotes of Winston Churchill, he always says, it's better to jaw than to war. So we have to talk. We have to talk to one another. And I think that's one of the emphases of the movement, plus the fact that I agree with Mr. Gulen that the schools are terribly important. We must educate our young people. I think that bullets and bombs and warplanes are not the way to create peace. I think it has to, especially in today's world of terrorism, it has to occur in the hearts and the minds of people, and that means education. So I see the movement with its focus on education and interfaith dialogue at the very heart of global peace. And I was delighted at the World Parliament of Religions about a year ago. Mr. Gulen was invited along with the Dalai Lama. He didn't go because of his health, but the very fact that he was invited is indicative of the fact that he and the movement are beginning to become important players in global peace.
Okay. In terms of the role this movement plays, let me put it this way. The modernization of Islam and the Muslim, do you see that? I mean, it is going to be a kind of modernization of Islam and together as well as the Muslims through the movement?
I think so. I'm not an Islamic scholar. You're more qualified than I am in that area. But at least in terms of the perspective of the rest of the world, that I can speak about.
Okay.
For a lot of people who think about Islam, they think about it in terms of traditionalism, conservatism. They don't think about Islam in terms of modernization.
Okay.
And I think this movement, with its emphasis on education and dialogue and so forth, is showing the world a different face of Islam that's extremely important.
Okay, yes. Is it a political or social movement? Why not we call it political movement?
I don't think it's a political movement. If by that you mean a very systematic, deliberate, organized strategy to enter politics, either through the creation of a political party or a political bloc or whatever. If anything, Mr. Gulen keeps encouraging his people not to be involved in politics.
Yes.
So now everything's political in one sense or another.
Of course.
But in terms of a deliberate strategy as a political movement, I just don't see it there.
No. Okay. So I have a quote from your book. It says that would you analyze the movement's ability to mobilize considerable resources and its influence among the decision makers? This is something actually I find it very important. I mean, according to one of your quote, movements has an ability to mobilize considerable resources and it is influence among the decision makers. It makes the influence among the decision makers. How it manages that?
Well, it's incredible how it can mobilize people.
Yes.
And I think the reason for that are these horizontal networks. I see the movement as a strong network organization. And because of the volunteers and also this networking, not only within a country, but across countries. The movement can mobilize people quite quickly. And one of the things that impresses me about the Gulen movement is its ability to organize. I'm going to give you a quote from the president of our university recently.
Okay.
She introduced Mr. Kofi Annan at one of the luncheon series. And we were at a reception together, and she turned to me and she said, "We ought to hire these people to organize at the university." She was so impressed with their ability to organize these large events.
Okay.
And I think one of the reasons for that are the volunteers. Tremendous system.
It is related with the commitment, isn't it?
It's related to the commitment, and it's related to this sense of people feeling like they're a part of the movement and have a responsibility.
Okay. I think also the follower of this movement considers this a kind of religious duty to serve. This is also something quite original in terms of classical or traditional Islamic rituals.
Right, and this again is that notion of service.
Okay.
And you know, Mr. Gulen has a good point when he calls it the Hizmet movement.
Okay. Well, actually, if we follow that in a long run, this movement, in a certain respect, is going to be successful. Let us consider. So it is a successful. Can you evaluate this? Can you consider this as a successful of the religion or Islam, or successful of this movement? How can you?
I would say successful as a social movement.
Okay.
I don't know what success of Islam would mean, but it's certainly, I think, going to be successful as a social movement.
Okay.
I see this movement growing, expanding rapidly,
All right.
and I think that's why some people are afraid of it.
Okay.
Anytime you become powerful, both in terms of financial resources and in terms of numbers, it can be scary to some people.
All right.
But I see the movement becoming very global,
All right.
and growing in numbers and in influence.
How they manage to become a globalization? I mean, so it is something. I mean, in terms of when we see any movement in Turkey or in other religious movement, the globalization something quite difficult. I mean, to make the global. So this movement appears to be managing that.
I think one of the reasons for that, again, goes back to Mr. Gülen.
Okay.
When in the early 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, he began saying there's going to be a vacuum.
Okay.
And there's going to be a tremendous need for education, and we need to fill that gap. I was just in Azerbaijan, and I met some of these gentlemen and the cultural minister who first built that first school in Azerbaijan, and they've just done a video of it, and it's so powerful. And again, this movement is spreading through the Turkish diaspora. It's a Turkish movement. There's no doubt about it.
Okay.
And as the Turkish diaspora spreads, it's bringing with it this movement.
Is this one of the, let me put it, I mean, it is